There's an interesting image series that's been traveling around the internet over the last couple of days, and it's kind of like a watercolor painting kind of essence to it. I'll put it as the thumbnail that of Jesus washing a whole myriad of different individuals' feet. Uh, the first one that I ever saw was of Donald Trump, and then, of course, another one of him washing Joe Biden's feet, and then there's the LGBT, a, a Ukrainian refugee, a Russian soldier, Vladimir Putin. Just there's a whole series of them, and they're all, let's say, awash is a good word, of different theological and political kind of subtexts underneath them. And the idea is that Jesus would wash anybody's feet. That's kind of the essence of it, right? And the message therein is that if you are claiming to be like Jesus or claiming to try to be like Jesus, then you also need to be washing anybody's feet. And like on that point, fine, maybe. Like it's in some ways it's a preaching to the choir kind of statement. I don't know who made it originally, but Christians do more for every afflicted population in the world than anyone else in the world. You can trace the IRS receipts given to non-profits that are primarily religiously based, and how that they fund hospitals and prison outreaches, halfway houses, recovery organization, mental health outreaches. Just if there is a cause of any kind, Christians have always been on the bleeding edge of every single one of them. And that no matter what you are facing, if you pick up the phone and call a local church in your area, one of them has those resources you need, or they can direct you immediately to another church in the area that has those resources that you need. Food or clothing or just anything. It's already happening. Like it's a message to kind of no one in particular, because the people that are already in essence doing the things that need to be done are too busy doing them to stop and hear you. So there's that. But then additionally there's this idea that I think we've departed from our like if you imagine you kind of have your theological foundation, you kind of step off of that foundation to try and make this message, you're going to fall off the side. And I think that we might have kind of done that. Why do I think that? Because Jesus washed 12 men's feet only, as far as we know. There are instances throughout his ministry where he would be visiting with others, and that no feet washing was offered to him. And in one instance, a woman comes and washes his feet with her tears, right? But in only one recorded instance does he ever washes anyone's feet, and it's his 12 disciples. And it was a polemic being exercised for the purpose of them learning a lesson, that he tells them, right? You don't understand what it is I've done, but eventually you will. And that what I have done for you, you are to do for one another, not just for anyone. And I think this is important to contend on, because of the fact that when something is available to anyone, it becomes derogated. It loses its value. Think about the way that currency inflates over time, devalues itself over time. That if you exclusively have your assets in printed cash, over time you are constantly losing money. But if you have your assets in a diversity of things, precious metals, corporate stock, savings accounts, things of that nature, then you may lose some here, gain some there, like all of that, right? So what I'm saying is that in some ways, in order for something to actually have meaning and value in its contribution to society, it does need to be kind of scarcified. The reason that intimacy with my wife, or the time that I spend with my kid, is important is that I don't just give that to just anyone. If I was constantly philandering other women, my wife in particular would not be very impressed with that sort of energy directed towards her any longer. And in fact, that would be a deal breaker for her, for the relationship that I have with her. And I think that it's important to recognize, and in fact, I think Jesus addresses it directly in that moment in the upper room to say, listen, you don't understand what it was he was doing. And that is why you feel this freedom to constantly, that Christians tend to do, to just apply it to anything, right? It's their lack of comprehensive understanding of the thing that gives them this freedom to dilute it. And that dilution is something that we as Christians should fight against. Not to say that you shouldn't be washing people's feet, but that you shouldn't just wash anyone's feet. Because in some of these things where it's talking about incarcerated individuals, people that are currently engaged in dangerous habits, like literally a person's got a needle in their arm or bottles scattered around them, or is openly advocating for dangerous lifestyle choices and stuff like that, when in fact Jesus comes to wash that person's feet, at what point is it going to be, no, you need to stop that now? And we cannot separate these things because of the fact that when you are too affirmative of a person's lifestyle without the expectation of change, one thing that happens is the person feels often enabled. That in fact, the negative behavior, the destructive behavior, gets promoted and entrenched in that person's life rather than being rooted out. They don't feel the, let's say, empowerment to cease this behavior because they don't feel a need to undercut it or to limit it or to reduce it. And so as a Christian, we must kind of feel our way. We have to walk that line between showing love, right, towards others, Christian or not, right, showing love towards others without becoming a negative sponsor of sinful behaviors and sinful attitudes. And sometimes it's very difficult to find our footing in that because it's very difficult to figure out where, literally, to put, where to stand, where to contend, and where to permit. But there is, just because we have a challenge in figuring out where the line is does not necessarily mean that there is no line, that we shouldn't be drawing one somewhere. If you think about the way people, in one way, of if a person is 16 years old, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my life. Fine. If a person is 50 years old and they're still trying to, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my life, you would immediately, there's something wrong with you. Something did not develop at the correct rate at some point. Something is wrong with you. And everyone might draw that line differently. Maybe in your 20s, no, dude, you need to figure this out. Or maybe 30s, you need to have figured this out or something. Everyone has an ingrained sense of when that should have occurred and when that needs to be corrected. Not necessarily for everyone, but there is a line somewhere, for sure. And so, in terms of who do you serve, when do you serve, those things need to be plotted theologically first, and then in response to people's needs. Because, quite frankly, needs never go away. And if you are constantly just being reactive and everyone's banging down your door, constantly just giving, assuming that you don't kill yourself in the process, just overworking yourself and then draining your volunteers, you just simply do not have the necessary resources to be able to provide in that way. In some ways, I think it's people trying to rely more on themselves than on God, more on themselves than trusting things like discernment and wisdom to guide them. And that's what causes a lot of organizations to go under, quite frankly, to not be able to survive, because they don't plan ahead. So, yes, the sentiment, I think, in this kind of, what do you want to say, this art series, franchise, there's some interesting elements to it. But it is something that needs to be interpreted in a theological fashion, more so than an emotional one.